to interpersonal conflict in a creative and compassionate way, and sharing our big emotions with others, giving us some practices and tools for how we might deal with things that arise in the moment. And yeah, so I just want to say welcome to everyone thank you for being here. And I'm going to pass it on to Amy to get started.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. And how I'd like to start off is actually just invite everybody to just take a moment to feel your feet on the ground wherever you're at, and just tune into your senses for a moment if you aren't already. And then we can go around and just share, tune into what kind of gratitude is bubbling up in you at this moment. And we can go around and each of us share our name, where we're calling in from, something you're feeling grateful for. Maybe also name the homeland territories that where you're calling in from, and I think I'll leave it at that for right this moment, and then we'll probably do another little round. And I'll just start off with saying I'm Amy Hyatt, calling in from Sokoke Abenaki territory, and today I'm feeling really grateful for the blue sky that keeps popping through periodically, and also for the lessons of the cold and of the season. And I'll pass it on to I'll pass it on over to Paul. Then you can pass it on to who you want to call on next, Paul.
Hello, Amy, everybody. My name is Paul. I'm calling in from the Catskill Mountains, Moon Haw Road, West Shokan, New York, home of the Esopus, presently and probably always Muncie territory, who I have a good relationship with. And I woke up this morning with a dream that I was at a gathering, and it was so good to be amongst people that I started to cry. So I'm grateful for anticipating that thing that will come sometime in the future. And I will pass it to Rowena.
Thank you. Hi there. I'm Rowena, she, her, calling in from Anishinaabeg territory, currently known as Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I am grateful. I wonder if I can turn the camera around. Well, I can. Okay, let's see. All right, so I'm grateful for this beautiful, beautiful place. Maybe you can see this circle of moss that I've been tending for a while. This is my sit spot. And maybe you can see beyond it, there's a bubbling stream down there. And what an amazing place. I am grateful for that. And I would like to pass it to, I'm going to guess about the name pronunciation and beg forgiveness if I mess it up. Dhyana Miller?
Hi, you got it. Amazing. Good to see all of your faces this morning, and thank you. I'm calling in she, her from land of the Iowa and Meskwaki peoples here in now known as Iowa. And I'm grateful for health in the body, and how that is a reminder that we're approaching returning of health to this great body of this earth, as she's giving us all these bodies that we get to walk around in. So with that, I'm also grateful to you, Amy, for hosting us all and getting together, and echoing, Paul, your words of gatherings. I feel that in my heart too. And I can't tell who to pass it on to next. So I see someone pop up here. Okay. Is there anyone else?
Yes,
You
we
can
got
pass it to
Lucy and
Lucy.
Maggie.
Maggie. Oh, great. I'll pass it on to Maggie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Maggie. I'm calling in from the land of the Paugussett people in Bridgeport, Connecticut, or maybe it's Paugussett. And yeah, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And today I'm really grateful for, today's the beginning of our last week of our fall session. And I'm really grateful for just the incredible season that we've had together and for all of the kids and families we've been able to connect with. So just amazing that we made it to the end of the fall, and I'm really grateful for that and excited for what comes next. I'll pass it to Lucy.
I'm Lucy, and I'm calling in from Wongunk territory in central Connecticut, Durham, Connecticut. And she, her pronouns, and I'm feeling grateful for community, both virtual and in person. Looking forward to the gathering of community as my girls come home from college. That will be really nice to have a larger pod. But so glad there are lots of people I can connect with outside too, and that I love being outside, and that's my favorite place to gather with people anyway. So feel very fortunate to be here too. So thank you, Amy.
Yeah, well, it's good to have you all here. And I also want to send greetings and acknowledgement out to the several folks who've already said to me that they can't wait to watch the recording. So I just want to acknowledge those folks. I'm going to just add like one more. I happen to be doing this call from the Vermont Wilderness School office, and out my window is Mount Wintasticate, which is the mountain that gives the name to the Abenaki name to this area, which is Wintastagok, and otherwise known as Brattleboro for folks who haven't ventured on the journey of the native names of places. So yeah, and I also want to give a round of gratitude to my teachers over many years who have helped me to learn how to navigate like the really big emotions and conflict that comes up. And there's many layers to this, one being that I think back to like 10, 11 years ago, where I had conflicts coming up in the workplace, in which a lot of times, there would just be sparks, flying, and that at times some of the challenges just felt really irreconcilable, and then having some teachers who anchors who just sat down with me and said, well, Amy, what you've been sharing, what you've shared to folks has good points to it, but where the hazard is showing up is how you're saying it, or the moments that you're choosing to speak up. And one of those big teachers for me has been Thea Elijah, who shares a whole set of practices called whole heart connection. And one of the things that she gives a name to is what she calls the group heart. And the group heart being kind of like how we come together, and that being aware of there actually being a group heart, and being able to speak into that group heart. Like there's sometimes where a group might be like really just like ready to go and play a really good game of, like soccer or lacrosse or something like that. And like what the tone and voice that you take in that moment has a different feeling than than a group that has just had some really bad news. I mean, I have to, like share, like as I was preparing for today, like this morning has been a particularly at times chaotic uh, moments, and I was like, oh, here's my opportunity to practice what I was aiming to share in this webinar. And even when I met with Maggie and Simon 2 weeks ago to talk about this, I came into it just being like, okay, I got to have this meeting. I'm going to meet, we're going to work out these logistics, and I've got tons of things to do. And I found, as Maggie and Simon were asking me questions, I was like, oh, I need to just pause here and take a deep breath. And I actually narrated it to Maggie and Simon of like, what I'm doing is I'm noticing that I am running way ahead and have my eyes focused on something else, and I'm not actually fully present here. And I'm just going to take the moment to feel myself having weight in my lower body, and that my feet extend down to the ground and are connected with the ground and rooted, and that even though there's a far distance between us all, we might be able to feel each other through those roots, down through the ground, through the earth. And I hope that as I've been sharing this, that all of you have been going like, oh yeah, I'm going to try that and just see what it's like. And as I was learning this and getting coached and paying attention to these dynamics, it really changed my Aikido practice, which several of you have actually talked with about before. That I've been training in Aikido, which is a martial art that the founder really was seeking to change the various martial arts that he learned in Japan. His name is Morihei Ueshiba, and was born in Japan, I believe it was like 1890s, or maybe in the 1880s. And he grew up learning a very traditional martial art that was really about how do we, like when there's a conflict, when there's aggression coming at you, how do you deal with it quickly and succinctly, which usually involved either severely disabling the person attacking you or killing them, just outright. And he started asking the question in his 40s of like, oh, can these practices actually be transformed to be coming from a place of love and a place of tending life, and to create something different out of the conflict? And he found it. And there's many people throughout the world actually now who practice Aikido. And what I found as I started realizing, I mean, actually when I was given the feedback of, oh, Amy, you're not really in your hips, you're not really in your lower body, you're not rooting down. And that's where people and all types of animals recognize that it's like, oh, you're here, and we can actually communicate here in a nonverbal manner that allows us to actually communicate and deal with conflict in a different way than when we don't feel like we can put our roots down, and instead we're up in our shoulders. And what I notice a lot of times when I am in conflict or I disagree with someone, I'm more aware these days of being able to notice of like, oh, look, my shoulders are actually rising up. I can feel all my energy and my consciousness going into my head, and I'm thinking really about like, how do I strategize and debate with this person, and can feel like, like the energy, between myself and others just getting in this really conflictive way. And I go like, oh, wait a minute, what happens if I relax my shoulders, breathe in and open my chest, feel my feet on the ground? And it's like, oh, we're still in conflict, but the dynamic has changed. And the level of emotions has changed a little bit. And in tying this back to my Aikido practice, like it happened to be as I was working with Whole Heart Connection, I was preparing for my black belt test. And in the black belt test, there's this part of it is where you have multiple attackers. So if you can just imagine yourself of physically having 3, 4, and even as many as, like in my case, I think I think I had 7 people attacking me at once. And there can be like, and I definitely found it in myself where at times where it's like, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I have 7 people attacking me, coming after me. And I'd get really up in my upper body. And that was often like the time in which people would clump up on me. And as I was practicing and preparing for the test, when I would start to notice that coming up, and I'd be like, oh, what if I just like relax and I keep moving and I'm engaging? If I stayed, if I kept my shoulders down, my chest open, and I stayed connected with my feet and my hips, I didn't get glommed on. And I started going like, oh, how does this actually then play into when I'm having conflicts at work, or I'm working with conflicts with kids, like outside. And I started playing around with that of just being like, oh, there's a conflict happening here. Oh, I'm noticing my shoulders getting tight. What if I breathe in, relax that open, and actually put imagine my roots and really feeling the weight in my lower body, and how that actually starts to change how people are interacting with me, and how, and like what resources we have for actually working with the conflict and connecting with each other. So I want to take a pause there and just, well, first of all, I want to welcome Sangoma. It's good to see you, Sangoma. And I'd love to hear any like reflections that come out of what I've just shared, where are the places where some of you may be feeling like, oh yeah, I've kind of noticed that in myself, or like, oh, that's a new discovery. Just, anything that bubbles up from what I've shared so far.
I can relate when I'm in my body. If I've been dancing, especially, I feel I'm in a much more capable place of approaching whatever might arise. And so for me, like, dance is the form, which is also the form that I dance often. It happens to be an Aikido based dance, contact improv, that if I can return consciously to that place in me, rooting through feet. And I'm remembering as you're speaking, hearing Thea Elijah with our Vermont Wilderness School gathering a number of years ago, encouraging that practice of the rooting in from lower body down in through the bottoms, through the soles of the feet, and that light down into the earth. So I'm grateful for that reminder, and how beneficial it is, because that also is an offering then to anyone that I might be in a space with, that might be a space of charged energy, and it's an invitation, subtle invitation, even if it's not spoken, as you're speaking, like of the animal in us, that we relate on that level.
Thank you, Dhyana.
Mm-hmm.
Well, most of the conflicts or tension charged things for me lately have been on the internet, and usually over unreasonable, or what I would call unreasonable, things. So I found it really affecting me. So I found out that I could actually remove myself from this situation rather than engage in something that was just kind of fueling. I realized that my opinion was actually creating my opponent, and I didn't actually have to be there. I could be someplace else. So, and what you're talking about is deflection, or for me, I interpret it. And sometimes I use humor to do that. So, and I did a keto for a little while and did other kinds of martial arts. And I think of applying that to the spoken word. It's sort of like the Zen of wrestling, how to not be there, but yet be fully present. So I still struggle with it. I'm not saying that I found an answer to that. Some of the things maybe just want to go back to my, 20 something year old self and argue and, stick my chest out and say, but then my more reasonable self said, wait a minute, let me just remove myself or say, or produce a commonality with somebody that I know that I totally disagree with. I know I have something in common with, and just get off that other subject and go to that thing that we have in common and enforce that. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Thank you, Paul. I'm curious, Sangoma, what you're thinking.
I'm trying to get to the unmute button. You know how we are with these machines, and they got me in the phone. I wish I had you on the laptop. Good morning.
Good morning.
My elders, my friends. Well, the first thing that comes up for me, and it's a wonderful tool, and to visualize it, not having never seen it like Tai Chi or Qigong or Capoeira, but I can hear what you're saying, of course, coming back from paralysis and still having slow time in the hips and all of what you're speaking of, we can very much relate. But, it's survival at this point to recognize the amount of trauma is what I'm going to speak for myself inside the body. Like last night, just making sure I got inside the shoulders that are just carrying ooh, with some Tiger Balm. And there's a hot tub waiting. I couldn't make it before this call, but there's a hot tub. And in the hot tub, the beautiful stone person from, that I've had with me, little woman shaped stone. And we do these things daily because if we didn't, a person who has rode a wheelchair for a year, would understand, because I do intimately understand when the mental, emotional, and other bodies take on too much. And it disrupts the filtering system in the earth body. It's just not good. So, a lot of our teachings, a lot of what we've been working with in prayer and ceremony daily right now is about holding a space like that lighthouse space for our world, our country, all of our humanity to not drown in it, because we're, you can't outrun it. The grief is tremendous. The tension is tremendous. The conflict is tremendous. And so the peacekeepers then have to dig deep, and they cannot think that this light, as you're speaking, comes from up here to a certain extent, but it has to be grounded. Right now, we take good care of our feet. We bless our feet with oils and anoint our feet on the roads that they're going to walk on. Right now, we're in our sock feet, and if we get too far up, lightheaded, which we did a minute ago, we just go to bed walking barefoot or get out in some dirt and bring these plants in for the winter. It's, it's a cycle, Amy. I'm preaching. Yeah, but that's my 2 cents, as Bob was saying.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sangoma. And I want to, just build on something that's come up in a couple, and I don't know, Rowena and Lucy, you might have more to add in just a moment, but I'd like to expand on this because it's come up in a couple of the shares. Dhyana and Sangoma both had a chance to experience a little bit of work with Thea several years ago, and this is like such an important thing. Like I feel like the breathing and the feeling your feet on the ground are the first ones of like, okay, we can start. Well, not necessarily the first ones, but they're really useful in helping to just get grounded and present. And then there comes the moments of like, there's a lot of times where we may not feel comfortable getting present because we feel scared, or like there's, like something's present around us that we're like, oh, I don't know if it's okay for me to be here. And it can be helpful to start to find root, but then to also connect in, if you imagine ourselves as a lighthouse, and that there's an opening in the middle of our chest. And this is where breathing the chest open. And a lot of times, like when we have things suddenly happen to us, we actually shut down our chest. And in the heart area in the chest, you can imagine energetically that there's actually a lantern there that's an opening for light. I realize my camera doesn't actually go as far as I want it to go, but imagine this being a lantern in which light shines through, and that light is impersonal. It's actually the light of like the energy of life and the impulse of life to be. It's that same impulse in a seed, that in the moment when the conditions are right, that the seed says, now's the moment to crack the shell and start to put the root down. And when the root's established, to start bringing the seedling coming up to the light. It's the same impulse that a little child is just going like, yes, I'm here, I'm gonna live, and I'm finding my way, and there's all this other stuff going on, and so like feeling that, tuning into that light, and feeling the support. This is one where many years ago I had I'm trying to remember who it was. Maybe I'll remember it later and send it in a chat or something like that. But it's actually a national speaker type person who was saying, like check out the sun. It's like the sun shines every day and shines on everyone and doesn't discriminate, doesn't go like, oh, you're bad, so I'm not going to shine on you, and you're good, so I'm going to shine extra on you. It's indiscriminate, and that is a light that we can all connect in with, a generosity that we can connect in with. And it's also the generosity of the rains. Like the rain doesn't choose who is it going to fall on in comparison, like to others. It's coming. It's the rain is doing what the rain is meant to do. And yes, our weather patterns are changing, and water's shifting around, and and such. But to just start recognizing like, oh, there is that, and that the earth is also like here with us. And to, in those times when we feel like where it's really hard to open up the chest, or to open, put the roots down, to just be like, oh, can I connect in with that light, with the generosity of the sun, and let that open up things a little bit. And the magic that happens, and I'll say I had many teachers for many years who were always like, well, you need to come up with a shield, and like have a shield that protects you, that everything bounces off of. And it was a revelation to me when I started to work with Thea, where she's like, shields are one thing, and you can work with shields. You can also imagine that you have that opening of light, and that it can get bigger, and that it's impersonal, and that as something's coming at you, that it can pass through and connect with that light, rather than I'm gonna a piece that Thea talks about is imagining that there's a donut in your heart space, and you've got donut holes that are just like, it's a little round ball right there, and anything that encounters that donut is going to hit that donut. And to imagine yourself as the personal me who has my favorite foods, and the people who I really love, and the people who I have challenges with, I'm that donut. So if I have a donut hole, everything comes at me, and everything's personal, and everything lands with me. But if I have a donut that has a donut hole, and it has a small opening, then some of those things can pass through to the light rather than getting stuck on me. And at other times, I can breathe that into a bigger opening, especially if somebody's got really big emotions, like they're really mad and they're directing that anger at me. I can like open that aperture up, and that anger is being met by the light, and by the love, and that I'm not as so prone to getting it, taking it personal and getting really caught up in it. And in my Aikido practice, I started realizing like, oh, this is part of what Aikido is. And it takes a while to actually learn this and do this, of actually starting to realize like, oh, if someone's attacking me physically, if I, like move offline and I meet them with love, it really starts to dissipate their attack over time and can actually resolve it in a way that is not so taxing on me, but does exhaust the person's aggression and helps them get to a place where they're like, oh, maybe it is actually easier just to, I'm going to use the technical term from, I've been learning more in the last like 3 years about somatic experiencing. And there's a lot in what Sangoma was naming that I'm like, oh, these are some of the things that in somatic healing, they actually recommend doing. And what things like doing a hot bath or humming or singing and such does is it engages what's called the parasympathetic system, which is the part of our body that's like calming and goes like, okay, what's going on around here, and allows us to digest. When we're activated and we're feeling in threat of our life, we engage what's called the sympathetic system, and that's the fight or flight mode, which is actually like fight, flight, freeze, or destroy. The other is the extreme response, like in that. And so it's really helpful for us all to increasingly become aware of like, oh, am I in an activated place where I feel that like fight, flight, freeze, destroy mode? Or am I able to engage? And there's moments where we need that. There's a reason why we have that in our system. And the question is, how do we recognize when we're in that and start to engage the parasympathetic, and that there's a place where having this like working with the donut hole and being like, oh, how can I open up more space? And that actually gives me more options than if I'm in the like, okay, we're going to fight here. And sometimes there's the moments where you need to just like let it out. And actually, several of my mentors, teachers have been like, yeah, when you're really activated, it might be the moment to be like, would it be okay if we take a pause here, especially if you're in conflict with others who aren't good at holding space, where you can, and I've had several instances in my life where I started realizing like every time I would engage, with people who I love dearly, actually one of my a longtime relationship of mine, we had a period where we got into a conflict where every time we tried to work it out, and even when we had mediation, I could feel, and she could feel us both getting escalated, and we'd get to this place where we're like, and eventually came to the place of like, maybe we need to disengage and not try to solve this right now. And in that instance, like we agreed to disengage, and it took 4 years, but 4 years later, after we'd both been through some other experiences in our lives, some other healing and working through some things, we actually were finally able to come back together again and continue to be in a really good relationship, like to this day. But there's, finding like those places of like, oh, where is the escalation happening? Where are the places where can we disengage, go let off steam, do some work, and then come back together again and re-engage the conflict. And sometimes we have that. It can be a luxury, and sometimes it's a necessity, depending upon the situation. So I just want to pause there and just hear more reflections, and especially give Lucy, Rowena, and Maggie a chance to share if you haven't spoken yet. And I also want to acknowledge that Ash has joined us too.
I can go though, if Maggie or Rowena, if you want to go first, whatever. I guess I definitely relate to the pieces of putting your roots down, and love the idea of trying to feel those roots grow toward others. I mean, I know if I ground myself in the morning at my sit spot, it's huge. I also, I've got a daughter with Asperger's, and she tends to really get escalated and elevated. And that's one thing that I really noticed early on was I just had to ground myself. If I could ground myself, just sink into my body, and I didn't really think it in those terms, but I've come to, then I could help her, help her with that sort of regulation, co-regulation. But I'm thinking about one of the things that been feeling my stress rise over the last few days is having that daughter and my husband together again, because they can push each other's buttons, and she doesn't meet certain expectations my husband would like her to meet, which neither here nor there, his problem upbringing, but trying to think about some of these techniques you're thinking about to help them root down and help them think about how to do the dance, because they it's just they're just blockages, and they're not happening all the time, but I can just feel so I'm going to have to sort of figure out how to root myself, so that I feel more calm and can help guide the process better than I can if I don't root myself. So I can sort of, and some of this, the way you were talking about it is helpful for that.
I loved, I was just sort of thinking about like, this is all very present for me right now. And I had an experience a couple weeks ago where a moment or a prolonged moment of conflict with somebody or multiple people at points. And looking back on how it went and how I might have done differently or wish I had acted differently, one of the things I reflected on was like, I wish I had the capacity to have sort of an out of body experience where I could like see myself responding in the moment, but kind of also help manage the situation. But since I was so fully in it, I didn't feel like I had the capacity to manage it for everyone else that was participating. But also hearing the way you're talking and what others are sharing, I'm like, maybe it's not an out of body experience, but like an in my body experience. And that desire to sort of like remove myself from my body or the way that I feel connected. Like it's just a different mindset. And because I think in that moment I was frozen and I felt kind of paralyzed. And so maybe some of these like grounding or rooting practices could have helped me feel more present, but not so reactive. And so, yeah, that's really helpful. And I'm also thinking about like, now that moment has passed, and in some ways I feel that I've processed it, and others I maybe have still not really like discharged all of that energy that I've had like frozen in me. So thinking about that too, of like being more present.
Yeah. And Maggie, you've gotten to witness, in our recent conversations where I have started giving myself permission in moments to just say, I'm just going to openly narrate what I'm feeling, what I'm noticing in my body right now, and what I'm doing to, change my body. And I've had a couple people who've started to go like, that's interesting, and actually try and realizing like, oh, this really actually does change things. And the other thing that has been really helpful to me, because I tend to have the freeze response. I actually many years ago was crossing the Canadian border and with a friend of mine, and we got pulled over and like spent like, I didn't get interrogated, but my friend got interrogated like for like 2 hours. And I was, so she was the one who was like showing up present. Meanwhile, I was literally just like petrified. And I realized later on that I was in a disembodied freeze mode where I'm like, if I pretend to be a little mouse in the corner, they won't notice me and do anything. And like later on, my friend was just like, what was going on? And I've now realized like, oh, okay, yeah, I really went into freeze mode, and that wasn't necessarily the most healthy, like version in that moment. I mean, there are times where you want to freeze, like when you have an actual physical predator, and hiding and freezing can be a really good tactic. I've watched many animals do that. Most memorably watched a set of chickadees do that when a sharp-shinned hawk like came in and was roosted, and those birds were just like totally not moving, and they survived that encounter. And the importance, like afterwards, of I mean, I've been amazed by this and have been using it in my own life, of doing shaking, just like taking a moment to just feel the whole body, like and down, like to the feet, and that how that helps to move some of that stuff, especially after you've had an encounter, whether it's an adrenalated fight mode or a freeze mode or flight mode, like to like discharge that energy so that you continue to have connection with your body and more capacity. The other thing that I've really been getting more and more in touch with is like in those moments of conflict, and breathing in and feeling around me and realizing like there's actually more here than just like the two of us or the three of us or the four of us in conflict. Like there is the sun, there is the rain, there are the trees, there are the plants. And when I start to go like, oh, I'm not in this by myself. There actually are others here. They may not be like physically present. Then I start realizing, and if I really feel into that, like there's a light bigger than me and a life bigger than me, that I can go like, oh, I have support here, and this may feel really big, this conflict that I'm in. It's not just me, present and engaged in this. There's more here, and that helps reassure me of like, okay, maybe there's a step I can take. Maybe there's something that can happen here. And I definitely, like when COVID hit back in March and things shut down, one of my first responses was to be like, okay, I need to breathe and settle down and just listen and pay attention, figure out what's going on, and then listen to like what's moving and where is life moving, and to tune into that. And that really made a difference, for my health and sanity, throughout all of this. So I'm going to pause there. See if there are other comments, reflections. I can see Sangoma writing things down and smiling periodically. Oh, nice. Above all, love each other deeply.
This is what we call the pause button. I love that you are giving us more tools in our toolkit for accomplishing it. You know what I'm saying? But that is the work. That is so real. Just a minute ago, which you were speaking to earlier in the, I did the same. It was a blessing for me to be locked down in Louisiana on my daughter's back porch with the murder of crows that would talk to us every morning so that we could navigate our stillness, no panic, no fear, just look at it and say, oh, that's right, we're on pause, and to respect that, if your ancestors tell you to sit still, and at that point I just left you, you all up there in New York in January, and with 3 different waves and airlines calling in, and then wham. Almost like my mother and grandmother came in the room and said, did we not tell you to sit down somewhere? No, you're not taking no plane nowhere. And what that means is a firm stop. Whether it's nature, whether it's a storm, whether it's a hurricane, it's whatever we cannot pass in the moment. And yes, we have to, that was dismantle the triggers. And now this is identified a pause button within. And a lot of us in the wounded part, I want to speak this into the conversation, are not yet ready to give ourselves permission or necessary pass or whatever it is, it's that live up to the moment expectation, things that tell you don't even have a pause button. But that's not the truth. right through here, this level, we have to have a pause button. And that pause button, as I said in the grandmother lodge last night, is what is the most productive use of my time? It certainly isn't worry or fear. So let me deal with it. Let me walk into that fear. Let me look at it. I want to know everything else. Age information, back where you started a minute ago, the intake that we're taking in on a level and every day and every moment. And who told you ain't got no stop sign? Who's in charge? You got to steer the ship, you know, and unfortunately, I think what society is realizing is that they told you every other kind of way to give up, the first mate or whoever. Go on, give up the steering wheel. Don't worry. The iceberg is not really out there. You won't really, you know. Yeah. And there's some startling information's coming up. And I give thanks that you're coming right at a time when we're needed. Yep, we need it to navigate and be clean with ourselves in the giving thanks, celebration and season of our own, and reaching out to the machine world and not over a table with love and good wine and a fireplace or whatever, you know what I mean? You know? Yeah, that's startling. That's traumatizing, you know? Yeah. And that's, we're dealing with a lot of people that haven't even gotten to that. They think the people on the ventilator is only people with trauma. It's not true. It's not true.
There's definitely a lot present in our lives, and you know, and so much of like what's happening around us, you know, to what's happening. I'm watching my language here, you know, of like how we actually are all showing up in this life, and you know, and a lot of things come our way, and you know, part of resiliency is actually figuring out like when something that is too much is like coming towards us, and we can go like, oh, okay, I'm going to step aside, and actually after the too much, do a little bit of processing so it doesn't get stuck. I saw Resma Minikim's one, who I've been, you know, learning some. I had the opportunity to attend a workshop with him in person, and I'm going to attribute this, you know, to some things that he shared, and that the trauma is really like when you aren't. What is it? Okay, so maybe it's the PTSD, you know, like where it holds on for a really long time, is like when you have something that overwhelms you, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, and afterwards you don't have a space to metabolize it and integrate it and allow it to move through. It's when we don't have that opportunity and we just hold on to, you know, and it just keeps building up, and basically it gets locked up in our bodies in different places. And then we don't have access to those places, and that can show up in so many different forms. You know, and like what I became really aware of 10 years ago was how I really was disconnected with my lower body, and it was because there were so many things that I didn't want to feel, you know, through my roots, and through my lower body. And you know, it was a slow journey to open, you know, back up that feeling and my connection with my body. And moving through that, I started realizing like, oh, I have a lot more capacity to engage with conflict, to engage with overwhelming situations, and finding my way back. I know we're coming close to the end here. I think I'd be, you know, happy to hear from one or two more folks, and I might have a closing statement. Yeah, Ash. Oh, well, let's see. Let's go with Rowena and then Ash, if you don't mind. So, Rowena's been very quietly with us the whole time.
I'll follow what you were just saying about the lower body. I found something interesting inside myself listening to you talk about that. And it's related to body image, which it's just less and less a thing for me. The older I get, the less I care about body image, but it's so deeply penetrated, it's like impossible to fully excavate the impact of, you know, of a female childhood and media impact. I've just realized that that I have a little resistance to paying attention to the lower half of my body, and that's a part of it. It's just that sense of like aesthetic despair, you know, which I've received energy work in the past from some remarkable people, a couple of whom have pointed out that they see like a low energy investment in the lower half of my body. And then I'll like, you know, sort of take myself away and like sort of consciously try to, you know, live more consciously in the lower part of my body. But I think it bounces back. I think there might be a little bit of body image being a part of that. Like, I just don't want to really even look at that part. It's not, you know, aesthetically satisfying. So I don't know, just new thought along these lines. And I'm totally enjoying, by the way, all of this. This is really, really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rowena. Ash.
Thank you. So grateful to see your faces, grateful for the waters, and I'm sorry I misunderstood my calendar and didn't join till halfway in. The reason I wanted to join this webinar is that I sometimes struggle with discerning the needs of others experiencing big feelings. And specifically something I struggle with is when I'm starting to see somebody's energy kind of escalating and rising, I struggle with sort of like when to be validating because they need to experience a big feeling, they need to let it out, and when to sort of be like intervening and trying to de-escalate, and just kind of like that discernment is a struggle for me sometimes.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Yeah, so I want to, this would be a good way to, you know, possibly wrap up our time of like touching base on this, is that one, our capacity to be rooted and to open up that donut hole I was talking about earlier and having the light come through actually creates an invitation to others for them to start, you know, like as they're blowing off their big, you know, as the big emotions are moving through, they can start to feel like, oh, there's this other energy, there's a light and a love that's meeting me, and there's a rootedness, and it's an invitation for them to find their way to that. And it might take a really long time for someone to eventually, you know, find that place. Like I totally hear you, Rowena. Like when I first got the feedback, I still remember when I was told like, oh, you're really not present in your hips and your lower body, Amy. I was like, what are you talking about? I've been doing nature connection and sense meditation and Aikido. And I've also been doing yoga for a little while. Like I'm totally in touch with my body. What are you talking about? And over the course of a year, I invited that colleague, you know, like friend, to periodically just call me on it. Like, and she would periodically go like, Amy, notice your hips right now. And like over the course of that year, I started having different experiences with my lower body. And I was like, oh, that's what you were talking about. But it was a very, you know, gradual process. And part of what that coach, you know, healer, you know, was doing with me was, she also has a, you know, and this is actually Thea Elijah. She said what can be really helpful is in those places that are really locked up to make a commitment to yourself to, like, say once a week or maybe once a day, you know, whatever the pacing feels like, to say to that part of yourself that's like locked up, I will come and spend time with you, just holding space, you know, where you tune into that light and bring that light to that space and hold it for 5 minutes. You know, maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes, and then go like, okay, that's as much as I can handle right now. And then to say to that part of your body, I will return, I'll come back, and that actually starts to build trust with your body, and that those places will start to unwind, and open up, and that what has been a lot of what my experience has been journeying through this, and will continue throughout my life, I'm sure. Um, I'm also really mindful, it's sort of related into like the question you were asking Ash about when somebody else has really big emotions. I think a lot about the training I have heard over and over again in slightly different forms from Miriam Dror, at Art of Mentoring staff trainings, where she says there's a difference between emergence and emergency. Both can look very similar with very large emotions, but emergence is where the large emotion is actually opening up, like an area, and that it's moving towards the light, and that the person is actually still able to maintain connection with you, or with others. Like they might be having big, but they're still aware of you, and you're feeling the connection. That's good. That means like there's movement happening. Emergency is where the person's having really big emotions and they've dissociated from everything and are not able to connect with you. And that's the moment where, really reaching, being like, I'm in over my head. I need, like intervention, from emergency services, whether that's, potentially, a 911 call, or, like whatever you have in your, relationships of who to call on for an emotional or emergency, in that fashion. I'm also thinking of, so one of my longtime relationships is with a woman of color of mixed ancestry who does a lot of work, bringing out history, like history and, the history of colonization and enslavement, and working with a lot of that history. And one of the things that she said to me, many, many years ago, as she was working, looking at the eugenics history in Vermont, with the Abenaki, she's, and also with people, African descended folks who had escaped slavery and settled in, Vermont. She said, Amy, sometimes I'm reading through this stuff and like the rage and, like things gets like over eclipsing, and I start to notice when it's coming along, and that's where I stop reading, I step back, I do self-care things that helps me reconnect with the bigger love, and with the bigger impulse of life. And I work with myself until that's at least 51% of my emotional field. And I keep feeding that. And then when that's gotten big enough, I go back and re-engage, like that history and, and working with that healing and those stories, and keep meeting that place, like those stories and that history and those relationships with love. And when it starts to eclipse into, like rage, fear, like whatever the emotions are, just notice it, step back, do the self-care things, like of which many of the things that I, was talking about, and sharing and actually doing in my body as I was narrating them, of like feeling my feet on the ground, connecting, with the sun, shining on everything, connecting with life, and really connecting with that bigger love. Like that helps to bring balance, to things, and to, and to bring that love into, like all these places that are so difficult. And my last one that is a thought that, or something that came up is I recently took an online course with a woman by the name of Amber Arnold, who is really lovely, an amazing person, working with Susu Healing Collective here in Brattleboro. And she did the course she was teaching was unbodying white-bodied supremacy. And one of the little catchphrases she has, and that we spent a whole week focusing on, was thoughtful pace. And that in white supremacy culture, or various dominating cultures, there's a cultural norm of urgency, and like having, like everything has to be done now and it has to be done perfect. And Amber was like, one of the counterpoints to that is thoughtful pace, and really noticing like what's the pace of the listening, what's the pace of where people are at, and the pace of healing. And for me, that really ties back into this other, longtime person of color friend of mine, talking about when I notice I'm getting eclipsed by anger, by fear and stuff, I stop. I can reconnect with the bigger love, let that be met by that, and then I continue. Yeah, that's where I'd like to. That's the last thought I'd like to, share, and maybe we can just, in a thoughtful pace way, which will take us slightly over, but I'd like to invite us to just go around and maybe share one thing you're feeling grateful for that got touched on, in our time here together. And just get to hear each other's voices one more time. And there's that's such an important practice, actually, is just remembering our human relationships, and as well as our relationships with all the different living beings. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Amy. Nice seeing everybody here today. So Henny Penny told Chicken Little that the sky was falling, but really wasn't. And so going to that place, when we feel a pebble on our head, we have to realize that the sky isn't falling, and if we rush ahead in anticipation of it falling, we're going to get in deeper doo-doo. So that's kind of my mantra, but thank you, and nice seeing everybody here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I saw Sangoma going for the mute button. Oh, she just disappeared.
I'll remember another thing you said that I really, really liked, which was speaking about the group heart. Thank you very much for educating us so that we can do a good job of taking care of group heart.
Okay, we got it. We managed it. We're really thankful for the time. I'm glad I took the time, even though the rest of my whole afternoon is calls too. But I'm glad I took the time, because that's what good kindred, good friends are for, over and above the teachings we feel we're giving one another, is to call us to sit inside of something within ourselves, fully present, physically, mentally, just sit with it. And a place in, obviously, again, the lower bodies, and having shared the handicapped world and seen the world through that lens, truly. I'm just thankful for you. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking how I'm thanking your ancestors and the gifts that are inside of you, Amy, and to challenge us all, because, we're all going to work better now on our lower back, feeling supported, our hips, our movement. I have a big ball right in here. I try to do it. And I had for a minute. I had gotten up to once a week. Now I'm going to make myself get up to once a week, because it seems to honor where we have been with each other today. And my gratitude for being able to come into this call and get called on your shit. Say, okay, you wanted to be present. Now you have been told, you have been reminded again, my beloved, to stretch and do what you do. And I can. Why? I'm not a person who hasn't had any of those teachings, good friends teaching it now. She go and would love, to say, come on, Ia, you can do it. Even at 64, you can do it. Stretch that back out. Because if not, then I will fall decrepit from the mission. And right here, as we are approaching, today's the 17th, tomorrow is a year that the chief that brought me into Ancestral Society flew away. And flew away. And for years, 10 years at least, I took him to my doctor. They said, oh, you need a hip replacement. They just say, all right, okay, you bent over and can't do, and he gave up. He fought the good fight. He fought the good fight. He kept on his bike, and his wheels, what he could do, and then slow down. And so that's what we have to do. I'm so thankful to you to bring us to this particular way to look at it, because it embodied everything that we're all talking about, but it did it in our physical temple. And that is as important as anything, because this is the body avatar we have. We have to work with it for as long as we are here on the mission. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm gonna jump off so I can get in that hot tub and be ready, daggone, for the 2:30 call. Love you
All right.
Peace.
Thank you, Sangoma.
Thank you, Amy, for just reminders of various things that I think will be helpful. I know it'll be helpful when working with my daughter, especially, who's had a really stressful time lately, and trying to help her to think about more tools to help her sink into her body, because she just gets stuck up in the top part. And it could be really, really helpful to help remember those other parts more than she's doing. And thank you, Rowena, for the body image place, because that may be affecting her. And so we need to figure out how to integrate that one too. So thank you. And happy late birthday.
Thanks.
Just some gratitude that I get to share some of your journey, and you get to share some of my journey as I, try and grow towards in the direction of wisdom. And great to be doing that a little bit alongside you now and again.
Thank you all for this space and everything that pours forth from your hearts, from your words. And thank you, Amy, for calling us together. And gosh, it's good to see your faces again, all of you who I've seen before, and good to see your faces, those who I'm just getting to see now. And I'm feeling filled up with a familiarity in that family familiarity of that word. I'm just feeling reminded of joys that come when I'm in company of people of heart. And I can feel the longing for that now in these days, especially more so. And thank God for people coming together in these ways, and in these conscious growing ways, and in these ways that return us to our feet, moving slowly like the caterpillars crawling along in the duff of the leaves, and feeling the coolness of the earth as she's starting to turn cool in a lot of places where we live, and grateful for bringing in the teachers and hearing all the teachers that you've brought here and present as you speak, Amy, and each one of us, because I think the teachers keep speaking through our words. So blessings, continuing the journeys and the good work that we're all doing together.
I'll just say I'm really grateful for the concepts of thoughtful pacing and feeling connected to the elements of nature and not feeling alone in those moments. I'm really grateful for that.
Right. And I forget, Rowena, have you shared a closing thought? I kind of lost track.
I did, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for taking your for many of you your lunch hour to come connect here. Really good to be with you all, and hope this continues to be of service, and and grateful for having the opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned along my journey, and hope that it is always helpful and of service to others. So thanks, and same to all those folks who get to watch this video recording. Hope it has been helpful to you, and good service to you and serve in life. So thanks. And thank you, Maggie, for being our background administrator,
Mhm.
tech
Yes.
person.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for being here today. Look forward to seeing you all soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, take care.